reason that David Lynch could do it is he's a master of structure. He understood story structure so
Oh
that he could
man.
become nonlinear, which is what I teach in my classes. I remember I
Yeah.
once taught like just a weekend seminar. I was invited to University of Chicago, right?
Yeah.
And I taught like a seminar for just a few students, right, just for the weekend. And one of the kids was like, I want to be a non-linear filmmaker, like
Hmm.
like Lynch,
Yeah.
And I said, well, the problem is you haven't figured out the basic story structure yet. You cannot mess with something until you understand it and master it, right? And so if you can't tell your story in a linear fashion, act one, act two, act three, beginning, middle, end, you can't then move
Mess
it
with it, right?
around. Memento, you can tell it that story actually works if you play it forward, right, or you play it backwards, right? I mean, there's a beginning, middle, and end to that guy's journey, right? And so it's just because that's done properly, you can then rewind it and tell the story backwards, right? So,
Wh-
that works.
Which is why I think people were shocked when he did the straight story,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, no, he's master. He's a great storyteller. He knows how to tell story.
I mean, look at Elephant Man. Elephant Man is a linear story, right?
Right.
It is one of the truly great films. People haven't seen it because it's some decades ago, right? It's truly, truly great film. Very emotional, true story of a man born with a very extreme physical deformity disease in the 1800s, and was essentially just a circus freak until he was discovered to actually be fully intelligent. People thought he was just deformed and not even human or whatever, and he was a fully intelligent, well-read, compassionate, loving person in an extremely deformed body, right? And that's a movie about how do you live like that,
Hmm.
where your humanity can't be seen and people don't see the intellect and the soul that's inside. And profoundly moving because that's what Lynch did. He went into the darkness of the human spirit. All of this, that's how I said it in my sort of eulogy to him on my Patreon, is that Carl Jung, the great is like great, you know, psychologist.
Hmm.
He said that the only way to achieve integration is to not suppress your dark side, because that just leads to to you acting on it and then projecting it on other people, right? And thinking evil is outside of you and you see it in everybody else except yourself, right? What it is you have to bring your own darkness out there so you can see it, you can face it, and then you can integrate it into your soul, right? And that's what David Lynch did as a filmmaker. He brought out society's inner darkness, the stuff he wasn't willing to face. And because it's subconscious, by definition, it's not linear because it's like dreams. Our subconscious mind doesn't work in a linear fashion. So he did this, and then you would have to face the darkness within yourself, within society. And that's why you walked away profoundly moved by his films, even though you couldn't put a finger on what it was that moved you, right?
Correct.
You can't explain what it is about Mulholland Drive that hits you so deeply, and yet it does.
Well, Eraserhead, uh, just
It
because
doesn't
it's
surprise me that Eraserhead is yours. I just know your sensibility.
well, yeah, because it's well, number one, it took years to make that film, so you have to appreciate the dedication from everybody involved. Number two, it's experimental, which I always appreciated, but the other part too is it also showcases how actually focused David Lynch was as a filmmaker. Like he knew what he wanted and how to get it, even if it took him a long time to do that. And that's why I appreciate. I also like in the poll, I voted for Elephant Man,
Mm.
because again,
That's
I
why
like those types of those types of stories. Uh, David Lynch is the type of guy who I never got the chance to meet, but I've heard him
Mm.
speak in public a number of times,
Okay.
and he's always like boring is never associated. I was actually saying this on Twitter, like no one could ever really qualify David Lynch as boring because it just is not in his own vocabulary as well. But he knows how to call out when something's boring. I know that, and I've heard him say it many times on various different panels. Um, but I just like the fact that he's got this sensibility about himself where it's all about how much fun can you have in challenging the norms and going the distance with that. And no greater example would be Twin Peaks, because that
Mm.
everybody, it challenged all the norms and everybody just soaked it up. And the fact that it was canceled after 2 seasons by Bob Iger is quite telling of the times. But no,
But
But
then
you,
they
you
release
hit something there,
they
Script. I
released
want
and
to build on this.
distributed the straight story.
yeah,
Well, I want to build on something Script just said.
Please do. Please do.
He was the guy that understood this dumb idea of subverting expectations because that the other idiots have tried to use. You watch his movies, you don't know what to expect, and they don't go the way you think they're going to go, and you're loving it. You're enjoying it like every step of the way, right? He was having fun with it. There was no disrespect for the audience. In fact, there was great reverence for the audience. He knew the audience was smarter than Hollywood gave him credit for. And so he would take things in interesting directions, knowing that the audience would put it all together. He was once asked, and I'll talk at some point about Mulholland Drive, which is my favorite film of his, right? But he said regarding Mulholland Drive, he was asked in an interview, well, what does that movie mean? He said, why are you asking me? It doesn't matter what I think. The audience is the only one that determines what the movie means. And he said that with great respect.
So amazing he said that.
Mm-hmm.
Mel, again, I don't know if you were here, but Mel Brooks once called him Jimmy Stewart from Mars script.
Yeah, I can believe that. Well, the other part too is when David Lynch kind of explores the idea of, or the concept of deconstruction, he's not doing it with the goal of that being the result. He's talking about the process. So the process is like, oh, this is how something gets deconstructed. And the subversion aspect of it is he's not really demoralizing the concept of the story. He's demoralizing the aspects of what it is to subvert. And I mean, that takes a level of genius that is way outside of my realm. Like I can process it, I can understand it, but for me to try and like measure up and execute it, I am not there yet.
Mulholland Drive is my favorite movie of his. Again, you love them all of them stay with you. That one stayed with me in particular, just like the opening sequence when you got the two guys sitting in the diner, right? And it becomes increasingly bizarre and tense, their conversation. It's sort of a different version of a Quentin Tarantino diner scene, where the Quentin Tarantino diner scene, it's like rat-a-tat dialogue that gets a little crazy. This gets darker and darker and eerier and scarier and scarier until you have a scary reveal in the like the parking lot of the thing. I mean, that's just the opening. And then it introduces Naomi Watts to the world. I don't know if you heard the story how he cast Naomi Watts. It's literally like, she's been a struggling actress for years. She was in her 30s. As you know, if you haven't had a break into your 30s for most actors, and worse, even for most actresses, you're out, right? And her friend Nicole Kidman had become huge, and she was struggling in tiny roles, little commercial in there. And then she just submitted a photo for this Mulholland Drive, and the casting director said that that Lynch just walked in one day to the casting office, and he happened to glance down, and her photo was on top. Naomi Watts' photo was just on top of the list of headshots, right? And he said, "Who the hell is this? She's got something just from the headshot." And he said, "Bring her in." He saw Naomi Watts, what she was from the headshot, and she had the goods, as we saw. But what's also amazing about it is that it's essentially two stories, right? It's Naomi Watts as this struggling actress, and then Naomi Watts in a completely other timeline, and they're just melded together without any explanation as to which one is true. Right? And that's again his respect for the audience. You figure out which one of these is true. You figure out which one of these is real or authentic, or maybe they're both true. And I was just walking away from that movie going, why is my heart racing from this movie? Not just the incredible lesbian sex, but why is heart racing, and why is my mind being activated? That's the effect it had on me.
Script doctor?
Can't really add much to that. I mean, Mulholland Drive came out, I was like 17 years old, I think, when it came out.
Yeah.
Because it was 2000, 2001-ish, something like that.
2001,
Yep, 2001.
So yeah, that was like, I remember it was my girlfriend at the time took me to see it because she loved David Lynch. Like she got way into David Lynch before I did. Like I knew about Dune, I knew about Twin Peaks, but it wasn't until after I saw Mulholland Drive that's when I'm like, oh, I got to see the rest of these films because they're so like they do the one thing movie is supposed to do: get your brain thinking, and it's not necessarily about like directly what the director or writer wants you to think, but just in general, like, oh, these situations happen. How would you respond in that situation? That's a really interesting situation. I don't come up with that or think about those before. Mm-hmm. That's part of the engagement of storytelling.
Yep.
So that's kind of what started me a bit more on my journey there, because, when I first saw Twin Peaks, I was watching that with the family, but I was a kid, so I wasn't fully grasping it. You don't get to appreciate it until you cross that threshold into maturity where you understand what these roles and these interactions actually mean. But no, to your point, like one of the things, some of the actors I've met that have worked with David Lynch before, they always say, and I think that's a bit stroking of their own ego, but I think it's also true, is they always say David Lynch has a great eye for character.
Mm-hmm.
Like he just like when you meet him, he knows he can cut through your facade and know exactly what you are. He just has that knack. And I think that's something that a lot of directors haven't really showcased as much, because some, they go straight for their friends, which I completely understand, and it works out for them. But where the director's trying to find that new it person, the one that has that hunger and has that ambition, and you're like, yeah, there's something there in that headshot, or there's something there in that tape. Let's work with that. Let's shape that. Let's mold that into something big and compete, especially today with social media influencers, which are just sucking all the air out of the room. And
Yeah.
how can you do that? Like, you don't have those directors anymore that kind of say, this is our guy, or this is our girl. She's going to blow the socks off of everybody with this role. We don't have those marketing campaigns anymore.
Yeah, and that requires intuition. Again, that comes back down to who I've said. I said it in my eulogy for him on my Patreon. David Lynch understands the human soul, right? And so he can look at a picture of Naomi Watts, an unknown, essentially forgotten actress who's never going to have a career, and look at her in her eyes and says, she's got something, right? That comes from someone who has a profound connection to his own soul and to the souls of other people. That's why his stuff works.